Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and today we have a very, very special interview for you all. My guest today enjoys getting lost in fantastical realms and enchanting stories from a young age. Her favorites include The Queen of the Tearling by Erika Johansen, Slewfoot by Brom, and Chorus of Dragons by Jenn Lyons. She has a Bachelor's of Communications and at sorry, and the Poynter ACES Certificate in Editing. She has been a team leader at a nonprofit organization, barista, retail manager, and office manager. She also wrote and edited training documents and best practice manuals for each position. And using her professional experiences as a catalyst, she has continued seeking opportunities to hone her editing skills by editing business memos, weekly newsletters, and fantasy novels written by authors just like all the guests I've had featured on the show. She specializes in anything fantasy, sci-fi, or romance. She lives in Idaho with her partner Connor and their cat Crouton. They love college basketball and Top Chef. And I am so excited to have another editor here on the show to learn more about the editing process and what she does for her clients. So, without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, editor, Miss Kate Black. Kate, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. So before we dive into your background as an editor, Kate, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners?
Um, I don't really think so. I love reading. I get lost in books very easily, and it's one of my favorite things, which led me to editing, which has kind of become my new passion in life. So, yeah.
Awesome. So what would you say as a little icebreaker and teaser? What was probably the most recent book you have worked on as an editor?
The most recent, I'm currently working for Stephanie Storm. I am going through, we did a dev edit together on her final installment of her Witch Clan series.
Ooh.
And so she's going through, we're actually working tandem currently. She's going through and implementing my developmental edits that I did for her. And as she finishes each chapter, I'm going through and doing a copy edit for her.
Ah, okay. That's almost the same thing I do with my editor, which I absolutely love. And we're probably going to share similar things in this interview. But before we get to that, Kate, let's start at the beginning. So, how did your love for books come about, and how did that in turn lead you down a path of being an editor?
Sure. So I think I probably got my love of books from my mom. From a young age, we were encouraged to read. I remember we would go to the library and I would pick out, stacks of books that were as tall as I was at a certain point. There was one time where we went in and the librarian pulled my mom aside and she goes, "Your daughter has over $100 worth of fines," because I didn't lose any books, but I would keep them until I finished them. And so I think I ended up helping out for like a couple hours at the library, reshelving books or something to pay off my debt because I was
Oh,
young and could
wow.
not afford it. They were very forgiving because I was there like every single week. Um, and so, yeah, I grew up reading from a very young age. And then when when I graduated high school, I was in my earlier 20s, I just kind of stopped reading. I didn't really have any friends who were reading, and I don't know, it just kind of fell to the wayside. And then during COVID, I picked it up again, and this time fell even harder into books. I didn't have my mom telling me, go outside and play with the other kids. It was just me sitting inside reading all day, every day, which I'm not complaining about. It was awesome. And so fall of last year, actually this month last year, I had just finished Slewfoot by Brom, had fallen in love with it, and I had no one to talk to about it. And so I thought,
Ah.
I'm going to make a bookstagram. And so that way I can at least get my words of feelings about this book out there. If someone wants to talk to me about it, they can. Um, and one thing led to another, and I met authors and started editing.
Awesome. And just a little tangent here. If I'm not mistaken, Kate, I think you were referenced in a previous interview that I had a long time ago. Oh, I don't remember her name, which is
Megan.
yes, it was Megan. Yes, I remember she referenced you. I actually not referenced. She mentioned you in the interview, and if I'm not mistaken, I think you also commented on that video as well. If I'm not mistaken.
I did. Yes. Megan was my very first Bookstagram bud. Like we hit it off so quickly. We're like planning to visit each other and do a book convention in LA next year. So it's been very fun getting to know her. And now we're going to be working together. So I'm really
Awesome,
excited.
awesome. So also in your bio, you've worked a slew of different jobs, and you also wrote the manuals for that. Now, I remember one of my guests, who's also an editor, said that transitioning from editing in that kind of work environment and then transferring over to like the books is a little bit different because the mindset's a little bit more, okay, this is more technical and now this is more on the creative side. So for you, Kate, what was sort of the aha moment for you when you realized that you want to take your skills that you've learned from your jobs and apply it to being a book editor?
I think it was the first time I got an ARC, an advanced reader copy. I
Mm.
was reading it because I'd never really seen myself, I'd never put it all together before in my head. Like I'd written these
Mm.
manuals, edited them, put them together, but I never thought like, oh, I could edit books that I love reading. Like that never popped up into my head as something that I could do. And so I had gotten this arc, and I don't remember what my first arc was, unfortunately, but it was before either the editor had finished with it or before I'd gone to the proofreader, and things were just popping out to me. And I was like, oh, I've never noticed that things just pop out to me. And so I started talking to my partner about it. And then I ended up meeting a lady I live in Idaho, who had a publication house who was also looking to train an editor. And that got me really excited because she's like, oh, I can train you and we can go from like your background and you'll just be one of my editors. And that we hit a wall and that kind of fell to the wayside. It just never really happened. But it had lit the fire underneath me that like, I can do this. This is something that I can learn to do. This is awesome. And so then I found the Poynter ACES certificate. And then from there, I did some certificates with BSU for editing, which is Boise State University, which is a university here.
Right.
And then my first post for it was just like I made it on Canva that said the first 5 authors who comment on this, who want me to take a look at their book, I'm just starting editing. This is for free, but I would love to edit your book for you. I would do a copy edit, line edit, dev edit, whatever you want. Let me know. And within a day, I think 5 people had claimed it. I started working with them, and they really loved what I was doing. I loved what I was doing, and it just kind of became my business.
Awesome. Now let's actually talk about that, the first day you're actually working as an editor for an author, which I imagine it may have been a little bit intimidating, a little bit nervous, because now it's like, okay, now I'm actually going to put my teaching into practice. So when you began working on your first book as an editor, this is a 2-part question. What were the promises you're making to yourself in terms of like how you're going to approach both the author and their manuscript, but also what were the promises you're making to your clients? And the reason why I asked this question is that, a lot of my guests, who have had editors and who are editors say that, when we work with clients or when they work with clients, they get horror stories from their clients who say, like, oh, the editor didn't really take my thoughts into consideration. They completely edited the book and it completely, altered the story. And that's a big, turn off for authors because it's a little nervous sharing their work with someone that they don't know and trusting them that they're going to, yes, make the book as polished as it can be, but still be true to the original story.
Absolutely. So I'm going to answer that in two different parts as well, because I think that the second half of that question came later for me than
Mhm.
the first part. So the first book that I got to work on was Courtney Wynn's Vessalus, and she had already done a down payment with an editor for
Mhm.
Vessalus, and so she reached out to her editor and said, "Hey, I have a friend who wants to start editing. Would it be okay if she did a first edit before I turn it over to you?" And I feel bad because I cannot think of her name right now, but it was from Simply Spellbound Edits. She said, absolutely, if she wants feedback, I'd be happy to give her feedback, which was huge for me.
Mhm.
And so I was able to go in and do a first copy and line edit of Vessalus, and then got feedback from Simply Spellbound, which was just, she was so encouraging. She said that I had done a great job, and it was just really exciting. And so for me, I'm very hard on myself. And so
Mhm.
when I went into editing, I told myself, like, you are learning. Like, it is okay with these freebies if they have questions or if someone comes back and doesn't agree with something that you do. Like, it's not your book. And so
Right.
my promise to myself was that I will not get offended if an author does not want to implement an edit that I suggest,
Right.
because it's not my book. And so I think a little bit after that came the promises that I started making to my authors. And just kind of like what you said, I would say that 75% of the authors that I've worked with have had horror stories from past editors. And
Mhm.
they echo exactly what you said. They didn't listen to what I wanted. They changed my manuscript. They told me I had to do this. And all of the certificates that I've done, all of the schooling that I've done, yes, there are grammar rules that every
Yeah.
single thing says. They are not to die by. And
Yes.
so my promise when I work with an author is I understand and realize that this is your book. This is your story. These are your characters. Everything I do is a suggestion. You can take it or leave it. If you want to have a discussion about it, then I will say, like, this is industry standard. But if you don't like that, we don't have to do it. I'm just letting you know this is what the standard is. And I think that that's worked really well with a lot of my clients, because they have come from editors who have stolen their voice, stolen their characters, and taken them in a new direction. And I think having a more hands off, like, these are the guidelines and rules, I'm letting you know, but
Right.
if you want to break them, let's do it.
Absolutely. And, I definitely like the idea, like, there is guidelines when it comes to editing, because I've talked to a lot of authors, some who I've not interviewed on the show, but just in my personal life, when they've gotten their books edited, sometimes there's no rubric whatsoever. It's just go nuts. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm a
Yeah.
person that actually likes to have some form of a rubric when I work with an editor. And even my editor, Lori Balls, who's in the UK, she absolutely loves it, because it gives her a clear idea of, like, okay, this is what he's asking me. This is what I'm going to do. Not to say that she couldn't add her own stuff that's not on the rubric, because it's not set in stone, but it's a guideline. Because at the end of the day, you still want the book to stay true to the author, but be a better version of what it was before. Which, that actually brought up something that I had in a previous interview, which I'd like to hear your thoughts on, Kate, which ties into this next question. So, it talks about, beta readers and arc readers. And one of my guests said, when they had beta readers and arc readers, they go to them first to improve upon, the book before you give it to the editor. Because, as they said, when you give your book to the editor or to whoever you want who's going to edit it, that book or that version of the book should be close to the polished version for publication as possible. And the reason why I bring this up is that, let's say your book has a deadline and you're working with an editor, and the book is like completely in like the roughest rough draft. That's a long time, because now the author is telling the editor, okay, this needs to be fixed. But the editor's like, I can't edit your entire book. You should just give me all that stuff. So I guess for you, have you ever come across that in any of the clients you worked with? Or going back to the horror stories, did any of your clients tell you of that experience?
So I think so I offer a developmental edit, which comes before a copy or a line or a proofread. And so that is more of if you're not fully satisfied with your story as an author and you need more like to add, or you need to flesh out characters, you want to make sure that the plot stays the
Right.
same. That's what that kind of edit is for, which I kind of think goes like right after a beta read, but well
Yes.
before an arc read.
Mm.
So um and a lot of times authors will ask like, do I need a developmental edit? And I'll ask like, how are you feeling about your story? Do you feel like your plot is where you want it? Do you feel like your characters are staying true to themselves throughout the story? And I kind of just ask them some questions to figure out like, is this something you need? Or are you to the point where you're ready for a copy line edit, which is a much more, like you were saying, as proofed as they can get it before they get
Yes.
it to me kind of thing. And so I really enjoy doing developmental edits. I think that it's really fun to be able, I love brainstorming. I'm like Miss Idea Girl over here. I'm like, oh, they could do this, or they could do this, or this thing could happen. And it's really fun, especially when authors are like, oh, I like that. I'm going to use that one. Yes, we did it. And I don't know if I have heard horror stories from the people that I've worked with in terms other than just like them taking it and making the characters do things that the author didn't initially want. So just kind of the same that I had already shared about. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, okay. So now let's jump forward back to, working with your first set of clients. So after you've done the edits and the author has published the book and the author started getting reviews, seeing that and hearing that from your clients, what was the, reaction like for you? Is like, how did that make you feel? And did it in a way validate your goals? And also, even before that, when you were showing the author, what you've learned, all the teaching you've done, what was the reaction like to your, professionalism? Because that I think is very important to talk about, like how you approach the edits, how you say like, oh, I think this would be good right here, or maybe you want to break this up right here, giving feedback, but still staying true to the author's voice.
Yes. So I'll start with that one since
Okay.
we ended there. That was something that I was very nervous about because I am a recovering people pleaser and I don't like conflict. And so that was something that I really struggled with more than just like punctuation. Like punctuation, you don't have to like say anything. You just add the comma.
Right.
But when I would say like, this doesn't really make sense, or I'm not understanding this, it was really hard for me to say that. And I literally, I have a sticky note here that I kept to my desk. It says, you are a great editor. You can trust yourself, be confident in your skills, to remind me like, I'm the editor. I'm supposed to be questioning things. I'm supposed to be poking holes. Like that's my literal job. And so whenever I get a little bit worried about it, I look at that and I say, no, I am not poking holes. I'm not doing my job and I'm failing my client.
Right.
And just how I go about saying it is I'll type it out how it comes off at the top of my head, which is usually like, that doesn't make sense. And then I'll think, no, if I saw that, I might have my feelings hurt. So I'll say, as a reader, I feel like this doesn't back up what I read before.
Right.
And then I'll say what you could do, and then I'll give an example. And so that way I'm like telling them, like leaving them high and dry. I'm giving them an option of how they could fix it. They don't have to use that option, but it's there for them if they need an idea.
Absolutely, 100%. And you know what? I absolutely agree. And that actually brought up again later in the interview when we talk about, the business side and how you built your brand. Okay, before we get to that, I want to now touch on a reflective question, a little more personal, because, for as authors and of course as editors, it's not an easy thing. It's not a get rich quick scheme. It's hours and hours, fine tuning our skill for authors. It's hours of honing our draft. Imagine for editors, for you, Kate, and everyone else who I've interview thus far. It's schooling, it's putting the work, it's okay, making the time to establish yourself as an editor in the publishing world and, showcasing your services out there. It is, same for the authors, it's a little intimidating because you want to show people who you are. But, with the rise of social media and everything, it's a double-edged sword. Yes, you can showcase your work. Like, this is my portfolio of all the books I've edited. Here are the authors. Here's what they've done thus far. But it's a little nervous to like showcase who you are. And then, of course, imposter syndrome comes with a vengeance and saying like, oh, you're not a good editor or you're not a good author. You're a nobody, etc., etc. So for you, Kate, after those first 5 clients initially, did you ever have that sense of anxiety of if you were going to be taken seriously as an editor? And if so, or if not, what has disciplined you to continue being the best editor you can be?
100%. I felt like that. 100%. And I think since the first 5 were free, when it came to saying like I have to charge you now, that was so intimidating and so scary for me to say like, no, I deserve to be paid for the work that I'm putting in.
Right.
Therapy's gone a long way in my life. Very, very, very helpful. But yeah, I think just my whole life I've struggled with what I want to do. I have had a lot. I mean, yeah, you read it. I've had so many different jobs. And when I started editing, I was like, this is it. I finally feel passionate about something. Like I want to continue doing something. And I think that really helped drive me to get through the uncomfortability that I was feeling of needing to ask for payment or saying like, yes, I'm not doing free edits anymore, but I am starting off at a very low rate. And then again, once I raised my rate, I had to go through, no, you've done more certificates, you've done more practice, people are giving you great reviews. It's okay to add a little bit to the cost.
Right. You know what? And I 100% agree, in that mindset. I've been doing YouTube now for about 2 years. And so far I've gotten like, 221 videos of like different types from author interviews, book impressions, historians interviews, etc. But I've never charged for advertising in my newsletter. I don't charge for interviews. I made a commitment that I wasn't never going to charge my guests for interviews because I don't absolutely like that. But I realized I've been doing this for so long that, you know what, I should compensate myself because I'm putting all the effort into it for advertising, promoting, all that stuff. And it is a little intimidating for me. It's like, I don't want to lose my readers or my followers who have been with me for almost now 2 years. So it's like that balance is like, you want to get paid for your worth, but you also don't want to do something that's going to damage your reputation that you've worked thus far to build. And I think it's a balance. It's like a dance. It's going to have some hit and misses, but you should be compensated for your worth and the work you go into. And that leads perfectly into the business side of the interview, which I am so excited to ask you some questions on this, Kate. So let's just dive right in. So when you officially got your certificate in editing and, after working with your first 5 clients, when did it sort of like hit you like, okay, I had these clients, I've got a good rapport, I know what I'm doing. How did you build your brand? Because your name on Instagram, I absolutely love it. So how did that name come about, as well as, your mission statement as an editor looking for new clients?
So that's a great question. So when I started my Instagram last year, my Instagram name is Bitchin' Books. And I promised myself that on Bitchin' Books, I would be 100% myself. I would not second guess what I posted. I would not archive things. I would just If I felt like saying it, I would say it, because I edit myself a lot in real life.
Mm.
I'm constantly like second guessing, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I need to apologize. Or, oh, I need to do this better. And I grew up very religious and we weren't necessarily allowed to swear, but I love the word bitch. And like if I call like a friend a bitch, then it's like, yeah, like we're besties. Like I don't know what and I love like the 80s term of like that's bitchin', like that's rockin'. Like I've always loved that. And growing up, I was never allowed to use it. And so then I was like, no, these books are bitchin'. I love them. So that's what I'm gonna call it. And then I think it was Courtney Wynn who was like, you should call it Bitchin' Books Editorial. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I should. And so I did. And I remember talking to my mom about it. She was like, well, I don't know if I would call my business that because it might limit your clientele. And I was like, in the same way, I think it's going to bring more clients to me because I want to work with the smutty, spicy, dark fantasy like type of authors. And I feel like it'll almost be like an icebreaker of like, yes, I am here. I don't have any sort of, people will ask me like, oh, I have this in my book. Is that a trigger that is too much for you? Or is that something you don't want to edit? I'm like, I'm open door. Like I will edit anything. And so I think that almost helped when I was building my brand to just be like, we're here.
All right. And actually, speaking of the books you specifically edit in, fantasy, science fiction, and romance, I'm always curious. So for you, what was sort of the mindset like choosing which books that you wanted to focus in? Because I've always been curious about that because, just as authors, we have our own niches for like what we're comfortable writing in. Is that kind of the same mindset for you as an editor in the sense that these are the books that I grew up reading? I think I have a good understanding of what happens in each genre. So I'm going to edit in these genres specifically, but I wouldn't be opposed to going outside my comfort zone now and then.
Yes. Yeah, I do think I definitely started with fantasy because I was a fantasy kid growing up. Like, if it happens in the real world, growing up, I was like, no, I need escapism. I can't do it. Now, as I've gotten older, I've realized like contemporary romances and dark romances and stuff are also like I really enjoy. And oh my gosh, I'm sorry. There was a second part to the question and now I'm blanking.
The second part was oh gosh, now I'm blanking on the part, but I think I remember what I was saying was as authors we have our specific genres of writing that we love to write in, but we're not opposed to going in other genres. Is that the same mindset for you as an editor?
It is. And an example of that is I edited Helen GW's book, Let's Get Nude. She reached out to me and I was actually introduced to her by Megan of Sunshine and Fantasy Books, who was on here before. And she reached out to me after we'd been connected and said, hey, I know that you don't do nonfiction, but I have this nonfiction book. Would you be willing to make an exception? And I was like, I'll try, but I am not a researcher. I don't super know nonfiction. And when I read it, it just kind of worked. Like it was things that I was, Let's Get Nude is like a day-to-day, how to make your life better. Are you able to be raw with yourself? Are you able to help yourself grow by asking yourself these questions? And as I was editing the book, there were specific things in my life that I was going through that were happening in the book. And so it just kind of helped, I think, to know like, oh no, I'm literally living through these experiences right now. I feel comfortable editing that. And I think it worked really well. She was really happy with how it worked out. So yeah, I'm definitely open to branching out. And I think that's why I do what I call a vibe check which an author sends me 1,500 words, and I do a sample edit for them. And I think that that's kind of where I would decide if something was out of my realm of ability to edit.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, vibe check, because there was a question that I had from another guest, I want to say last month, but I think it is important because, you know, as an editor, you know, as a businesswoman, you have, you know, clientele that you love to work. From what you said, you are comfortable working with like everyone for like all books. But I would imagine there is like a no list of certain books that you would not want to edit. And I'm not talking about books that isn't my, you know, my preferred, but it's like the subject depending on, you know, what it is. So I'm wondering for you, Kate, where did that, you know, mindset come in, saying, you know, like, okay, yes, I want to work with authors, but I'm going to establish these are the books or the topics within books that I will not work with because these are, you know, a hard pass. And I'm sorry if that does not work for the author, but this is where I stand. Because yes, you know, as a person, oh boy, can you hear me all right, Kate? All good?
Yeah.
Okay, so had to fix that. So it should be all better now. I had to use my phone as a hotspot to have a good connection.
Okay.
So maybe a little drop here and there, but it should be secured. Okay. So back to the question I was saying before all that. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say in this question is that when you began editing and you started getting the clientele you want to work with, when did the mindset of, okay, I'm going to have to make a no list of books that I will not edit? And I'm not talking about, you know, books that are not your preferred genre or genres that you don't have experience in, but I'm more so referring to of the topics and themes that are too uncomfortable, too graphic to really edit. Because I definitely feel, you know, there has to be a hard line of what books and what clientele you will not work with. Going back to what you said as the vibe check.
Yes. I have not stumbled across anything that I've been uncomfortable with not editing yet. I think that if someone came to me and there was like hate speech towards like a marginalized community or something, then that's something I would not do. But it seems like the authors that have reached out have been they've been awesome. So like there hasn't been any issues of like, I don't know, I guess if there was anything that I wasn't going to do, it would be that something that doesn't line up with my values. And so I'm not going to support something that actively goes against something I believe in.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think that should be talked about because, you know, you're a businesswoman, you've created your brand, your business, and you wouldn't want to work on a book that could potentially, you know, derail your business, shoo away your clients, and, you know, destroy something that you worked so hard to build. So now, turning away from that, let's actually focus on, you know, the audience and the readership, especially when you're going into editing a book. So the author, of course, you know, we always have our audience, you know, going into our books. But working with an editor, I imagine they can see things from another perspective, another audience that the author did not take into consideration. So for you, Kate, did you or have you helped your clients understand that there was a new audience within their books and help them realize that audience? And could you give us an example of that?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think that the only thing that kind of fits that question would be I've had authors ask me as I'm editing, do I need to add anything else to my warning at the front of my book to trigger warnings and stuff? And because of different things that like I've gone through in life, as I've read things, I'm like, this hit me a little bit differently. And I don't know if that's what you intended. And so I'll highlight things like that. But other than just saying like, as a reader, this doesn't make sense to me, or this is confusing, there hasn't been anything that I've been able to say like, this is kind of like a new reader group. Have you thought about them? Kind of thing.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's actually very, very, interesting point. And it kind of goes into, the readership, especially when it comes into, the editing process. So have you ever edited a book that was outside of your comfort readership, from adult fiction to, let's say, working on YA? And has that mindset shifted between each book? Let's say you're working on an adult fiction book that's these things, but then your next client's working on a YA novel that's more of like clean fantasy, so to speak. And so you have to approach it with that mindset.
Yeah, it is a little bit, it does take a little bit of time to switch gears. And
Yeah.
so it is, sometimes what I'll do is, because sometimes I can work on books at the same time. And like the first part of the morning, I'll work on this book. And then the second part of the morning, I'll work on this book. But sometimes I do have to say like, okay, this is a YA book. I can't edit you this week, but I can do in 2 weeks, because then I'll be done with this adult romance. Because it is hard to switch back and forth between spicy and closed door.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, I've always had this question on my show. Well, more of like a statement, but I'm going to make it into a question.
Okay.
Have you ever worked on a book that was already published beforehand? And the reason why I bring this up is that I'm sure as a reader, you probably picked up a book, started reading it, but, your editor brain probably may have seen like, the issues, the errors, and it's like, I can't turn it off because I want to enjoy it, but there's so many grammatical issues, structural issues that it doesn't make sense. And I'm wondering, have you ever had that experience with a client?
So kind of. So back to Stephanie Storm. She has asked if I would go back and just do a copy edit of a few of her books. And so we're scheduled to do that at the beginning of the year. So I haven't done that yet, but it is on my schedule to do. But I do, something that I have done is I will read a book, and if I find like that's already published, and if I have those issues of like, oh, this is hard to read because of the grammar, then a lot of times I will reach out to the author and be like, hey, because it's really hard for me to not like a book. If it gave like, even if the grammar's bad, like it's really hard for me to, there's very few books that I've read that I'm like, I hate this book and I would never recommend it to anyone. And so a lot of times I'll say like, hey, I really liked your story. I loved this part of it. This part made me laugh. And then just say, I'm an editor. If you ever need help, or if your last editor can't fit you in for your next book or anything, like I would love to work with you. And that has actually gotten me a few clients, because either they didn't have the funds to edit their first book, or they didn't know they should edit their first book, or they had a really negative experience with their last editor and they just didn't do a good job on their first book. And so that has been one way that I actually find new clients, is by going through and just like reading random books on Kindle Unlimited.
Oh, awesome. And sort of like as another little fun question, which I'm eager to hear your thoughts on, Kate. So you've mentioned Courtney Williams, you mentioned Helen GK, you've also mentioned Megan, who have all been featured here on the channel. They have been really, really good, clients and friends of yours. But I'm also curious, are there other bookstagrammers or editors on social media that you would like to give a shout out to, who have helped you understand of how to build your brand as well as present your brand and services, on social media, especially on Instagram, where there's a plethora of indie authors, bookstagrammers, and book editors?
Yes, there are so many people I'd love to shout out. Sippin' on Stories, her and her husband helped make my logo. They were so incredibly helpful in doing that. I thought that I knew what I wanted, and Bob was like, what about this? And I was like, oh my gosh, your vision is so much better than mine. Thank you. So he was awesome. Jennifer, I think her last name is Mahan, is how you say it. She's the author of the Veiled War series. Veiled Voyage is her first book. She's been awesome. I've gotten to work with her on a couple of books, and just like her encouragement and friendship has been, she's one of the few authors I've actually gotten to meet in real life, and that's been so fun. Stephanie Storm has been incredible. She is a project manager in her real life. And so she has just been like, have you thought about doing this with your business? Have you thought about when you run an ad, choosing, like, making your own target audience? This is how you do it. Have you thought about this? And just like ask me questions to really think about the business development side of my business. And that's been incredibly helpful as well. So all of those people, and then just every author that I've worked with has been so encouraging to me. They've just been like, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your help. I can't wait to use you again. Like, it's just been such an encouraging and incredible community. There's really I have no negatives of being on Bookstagram. I know that some people have gone through negative times and there's been drama and things, but the community that I've found myself in has been nothing but supportive and incredible.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you have had that positive experience and you have built this sort of community of people that you trust, that you enjoy working with them. And, community and fellowship is something that I think is very important, especially, in the author community, for editors, for bookstagrammers, because we're all trying to help one another. We're all trying to support each other. Because I definitely feel, just as authors, for editors as well, we're all trying to showcase our voice and our individuality. But I definitely feel, and maybe you have some thoughts on this, Kate, that it's not an easy gig. It's a hustle. Whether if you're an indie author, whether if you're a self-made editor, it's a hustle. You have to really, really showcase who you are on a daily basis. And, for me, from the mindset of an author, I've come to understand that there's two paths to be an author and to be known as an author. One's dedicated to storytelling, not motivated by capital. The other's motivated by, marketing, wanting to showcase their work. And applying this into the editorial sense, I think it's almost the same thing. There's to be an editor and to be known as an editor, where, for one, you want to build your brand and you really want to make a good rapport with your clients, where, yes, it's nice getting paid and because it helps build your brand. But the other one, to be known as an editor, is huge, where that builds your portfolio of the books you've edited and that have gone like Amazon Times best-selling list, New York Times. But I definitely think it's important to note that just as publishing in this industry as an author is not easy, to establish oneself as an editor in this industry, especially like a independent editor, is not easy as well, because there is no guarantee that the first book you edit is going to jumpstart your legacy as, a world-renowned, respected editor in the editorial community. Yes, there are exceptions to that, just like in the author community. But you have this roller coaster of highs and lows. Sometimes, the books that you've worked on will definitely get the status recognition. Sometimes the books you've edited and put a lot of work in will not get the status recognition from the author's point of view. And that can, deflate the editor, saying, I'm not doing good. I should be, really being at the top of my game. Like, I know what I'm doing, where you're pushing yourself, because yes, this is a job, but it's also a passion, because you have to have a passion to enjoy books to be a good editor, as one of my interviewees from a previous session said not too long ago. And if that passion dies, you're no longer going to be motivated to be a good editor who loves books. You're just going to be an editor who says, like, okay, take this out. This doesn't make sense. It's going to be more on the technical side, more structurally. And sometimes that works. sometimes that doesn't. So, Kate, I know this is a very, very long question, but ultimately, here it is. So, in your opinion, what is your thoughts on this? Just as authors in the publishing industry, it's a 50-50 chance. For editors going into this industry, there is also that same 50-50 chance that no matter what book they work on, no matter what genre or category or size, it's not going to give them the overnight success they're looking for, but it should be seen instead as a stepping stone to build their rapport, to build their status.
Yeah, so that's really, I think you're right. It is a hustle, first of all. And I feel like as an editor, I almost am luckier because I'm able to market all of the books I edit, whereas an author is only able to market their book or books. And so I almost feel lucky because not only can I, with my Instagram is mostly what I use for marketing. And so I do reviews, but then I also do promote all of the authors that I edit for on my Instagram, which I think helps a lot, and keeps new people finding my page, which is really helpful. But then the other side of that is I think that building a friendship between myself and the author is super important. It makes me feel valued. I think it makes them feel more valued. It gives me more of, I feel like a proud grandparent. Like, because it's not my book, but like I feel like I'm cheering them on and I'm like so excited to see them grow as an author, grow their characters, grow their series, grow their brand, that I'm just like sitting there and like, yes, we're doing it, it's amazing. And so whenever I get to post about the authors that I work with, I feel like, yeah, like a proud grandparent. Like I'm removed from the book. There's not like, yes, I help polish it and make it better, but they still could have done it without me, like, and so I think the best thing that I can do to help build my brand is to make real connections with the authors that I'm working with, so that we can work together in the future, but then also so that they'll go and tell their author friends, like, use Kate.
Absolutely. And kind of as a tangent, and I'll add on to that, with the success you have right now, or even before when you started really, really getting into the mindset, the hustle of it, did you consider at one point maybe joining a publishing house to be, either, what's another one, like, I'm going to use one from a friend that I know, like a Curious Corvid Publishing, Simon Schuster's, Penguin Random House, one of those editors? Or do you feel for you, not just as a person, but also for who you are and what you are comfortable of doing, that being an independent book editor is something that you want to continue pursuing, and again, building your brand and your portfolio and your rapport with your clients?
So there's a couple different sides to that. I think that one of the first things that I hear when I think like working for a publishing house is I do have a job on the side of this that like pays for my life. And so that would mean switching jobs, which I think would be great. And I think that working for a publishing house would be awesome. I just don't know if I really enjoy building my own brand and getting to pick and choose who I'm getting to edit for. Whereas if I think that I haven't super looked into working for a publishing house, but I think that if I did that, then it would be a lot more like, this is what you're doing, which I don't really want. The other part, and I've been thinking about this as like we're getting to the end of the year, should I raise my prices for next year? I don't want to keep, surprising and when I raise my prices, the people that I'm currently working with and plan to work with in the future, I work a little bit differently with them and make sure that it's okay. And we figure all of that out.
Right.
Together. But I really love working with the independent authors. I also feel like I really struggle with the books that are super popular. I feel like I don't generally love them the way that I do the more niche, less read books that haven't been found yet. And I don't know if that's like oh, it's popular, so I don't think that's what it is. It just,
right.
they seem to be very similar to the other books that are already popular. And so one thing that I
Right.
found about working with independent authors is it's all new. Like, there's so many
Right.
new, unique, incredible stories and plots and characters and like aha moments. And it's so exciting for me. And so I really love working with independent authors. And I think that as I've built my brand, I've really tried to make it as easy as possible for them, because a lot of the people that I work with are working, they're parents, and so they have already
Mhm.
2 jobs that they're doing full time, and then they're adding writing on top of that. Very few
Right.
of them, if any, are full-time writers that are just getting to write. And so when I
Right.
send over the contract, I make sure, like, okay, we can do a payment plan, we can make it. I have one person that has done 12 payments over the course of like 6 months. I've had one person that just pays in a lump charge the whole thing. And then I also have people who will send me parts of their book like quarterly, because that's what they can get done. And then I also make sure that I don't charge anyone for not getting their books in on time. I don't have any sort of that, because I want them, writing books is their passion, and I don't ever want
Right.
them to feel like it's work because of me. Like, I can wait on your book
Okay.
as long as you need me to. I don't care. Like, if you need to set a deadline for your own self because that's how you work best, I respect that and I'm totally down for it. But if you were setting a deadline for me because you want me to have the book at a very specific time, you don't need to do that. Like, I just want authors to still love writing. And I know from the
Right.
authors that I've worked with that when it comes time to edit, it can be a really intimidating experience. And I don't want it to be. I want it to be fun. I want it to be enjoyable. I want to take away the fear and the frustration that comes with editing. And I want to make it something that's fun and exciting and enjoyable, not something that they are like, ugh, I have to talk to my editor today, or oh, I have to implement the changes for my edit today.
Right.
So,
You know, that is 100% something that I've, very, very much agree with. I'm very fortunate to find a lot of authors on Instagram, a lot of the indie authors, some professional authors or commercial authors as well. But I love seeing these new books, even if they're not out yet. I love hearing about them, and I absolutely enjoy it. And as we near the end of this interview, there's one final question that I did want to ask you,
okay.
and I think it's an important one. So, with everything that you've learned thus far, Kate, from your training to earning your certificate, building your brand, getting your people, building up who you are, what is your word of wisdom to people out there who are watching this who want to transition from editing as like a hobby for like their friends and families to now going into, to use a word, as a commercial editor, where this is now their job, whether it's like part-time or full-time, or they're hustling? What is your word of wisdom to them?
I think it's just go for it. Like, I would ask, like, what's holding you back from going for it? But then I feel like, at least for me, a lot of it is just self-doubt. And so
Right.
just go for it. Decide that you're worth spending money on, decide what your value is, and ask for it. And I think that that is way easier said than done. Don't get me wrong. But I do think that at a certain point, if you decide that that is something that you want to do instead of it being a hobby, you just have to kind of, jump off the cliff.
Yes. And as a little fun question before we actually end this interview, and it's something that an author said to me, which I want to hear your thoughts on. What is your thoughts on editors editing something they're afraid of? Because initially she said this in her author interview, Sabrina Vorman, shout out to her. When I asked her that question, she said, write what you're afraid of, write what's out of your wheelhouse. So what is your thoughts for editors with that question, editing something they're afraid of, that's out of their wheelhouse, that's out of their preferred genres of editing?
I think that with editing, it's probably a little bit different than writing. I would say that like if you're a contemporary romance editor and you're trying to get into like high fantasy, there's probably a couple, and you don't read fantasy, but you're like getting into it. I think that it's probably worth reading some books in the genre before you jump into editing the genre, just because fantasy is massive. Sci-fi is massive. Like, especially with sci-fi, like you can create whatever you want. Like the rules are endless. Like you can create your own magic system, your own rule system. And so I do think like if you're wanting to make that jump into something that you're not comfortable with and you're kind of like scared of, just read as many books as you can in that genre. Understand how world building happens, understand how magic is created in different ways before you go in and start editing for someone, because I think that that can potentially be a little bit harmful if you're going in blind and you're like, well, but this,
okay.
Because you want to be able to understand how the genre works before you dive into editing it. Because not that there's rules in fantasy, but I do know from authors that I've worked with, there's some frustration when they send out arcs and say it's an urban fantasy and romantasy girls are reading it, and then they're frustrated because there's not world building.
Yes.
Well, but this isn't urban fantasy. It's happening in the real world. There doesn't need to be real world. Or there doesn't need to be world building because we're in Chicago. The world is built. You live in it every day. The magic structure can have some building to it, but the world building doesn't need to be there because it's Chicago. And so I do think that as an editor, it's important. The best thing you can do if you're wanting to switch genres is read as many books in that genre you're wanting to switch to as you can before you start editing those genres.
Perfectly said and stated, Kate. And with that, viewers and listeners, we come to the end of this amazing interview here on the channel. Now, Kate, thank you so much for coming on the show. And before we officially end, where can people find you on social media? And are there any books you would like to announce that are coming out later this year or the beginning of next year that you've been working on or have worked on previously?
Yes. Okay. So my handle on Instagram is @bitchinbooks. My website is www.bitchinbookseditorial, and there are reviews for the books that I've written up on there as well. Books that are coming out. Love Greek Style is a contemporary romance that just came out this last weekend. It's awesome. It's an age gap where the woman is dating a younger man, and it is just delicious. Let's see, what else is coming out soon? There's so many. Stephanie Storm has the last book of her Witch Clan series coming out the beginning of next year. So if you haven't read the Witch Clans, I would go back and read those in preparation for this third book that's coming out because it's going to be so good. And then Kaylee Robinson just had Tides of Deception come out like a month ago, and she's currently working on book 2 coming out in February, and that's more of a Greek Atlantis love triangle fantasy. It's so good. Very big what just happened moments in both of those books.
Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another editor interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. A huge thank you to Kate for coming out here on the show and telling us all about her brand, her journey, and we wish her the very best. Kate, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been an absolute joy to be here. This was awesome.
Thank you, Kate. And also, viewers and listeners, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And if you've been following up on my YouTube, I dropped 2 new episodes of the audiobook series for both The Gathering and Amethyst. So I urge you all to go and check them out and give them a listen to. And as always, this is The Wandering Scribe and The Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world.